We are an environmental charity that's focused on reducing the waste through consumption, and we want to empower design professionals and consumers all the way through to reduce the impact. We are focusing on SDG number 12. So we're here to have a topic discussion with experts, because one of the things that I feel has the most gap is when we are our most creative self and we go into industry and we have the real job and we want to take that problem solving into our real life solutions. And how, as industry, do we bring in that creativity in order to still create our business model? So I hope you get some takeaways today with our experts, and I want to invite them up to the stage, and Laura will take over as moderator and introduce everybody themselves. So thank you very much. And for questions and answers at the end, I hope that you do feel free to challenge us, to understand us a bit more, and to go away with something that will really motivate you and inspire you. Thank you. There's just one thing I should say, is one of our speakers couldn't make it today at the last minute, so James will not be able to come, unfortunately, but I'll sit in his place. And as well as REDRESS. REDRESS is quite new for me, but I've been in the industry as a designer and product developer for 20 years, so I will chip in where you need me.
Great. So nice to see everyone. It's nice to be in an in-person event. Very warm welcome. This panel is going to be looking at, do emerging fashion professionals have the skills for a sustainable industry today? My name's Laura Westbrook. I'm a correspondent with the South China Morning Post newspaper here. And allow me to introduce our panel. Let's start with Meiyan Chan. She is a working designer and a REDRESS alumni from 2019. Chris Lowe is an associate professor of the School of Fashion and Textiles at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. His main research topics are related to sustainability in operations management, social media, and big data analytics. And we have Greg Cole, who's the co-founder of marketing consultancy éCLAIR and the pre-owned fashion platform dejaWOOO, and who also works with a lot of major brands in the region. And Marianne is, you've just met, she's sitting in for James, who unfortunately can't be here. Marianne previously worked as a knitwear designer and also worked in the supply chain. So we're going to have a discussion for about 40 minutes or so, but we really want to give you guys an opportunity to ask your questions, so we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for any questions you have for any of the panelists. So yeah, if anything kind of strikes up at you while we're talking, keep it in mind, and we'll try and get round to as many towards the end. So yes, I think this is such an important topic, not just for people who work in the industry, but also, everyone else, because we're the ones who are buying the clothes. So I think, everyone is invested in this topic, in this issue. I want to start by asking all of you the same question. Let's start with you, Meiyan. What do you think is the most important skill for someone who wants to work in the fashion industry today?
Fashion industry or sustainable fashion industry?
Well, yes, exactly. So it's working in the fashion industry today. What do you think is the most important skill when it comes to wanting to be sustainable?
I think probably have to be truly understand what the sustainable really means to you and your brand and to your customer. Because it's pretty easy to just put the sustainable front line to your brand. Using kind of organic cotton is pretty easy, but deep down, what is really sustainable is not just about the material. It's not the facade, how green your campaigns looking. It's like real deep down to go to design, go to supply chain, and all the little detail you put into effort.
So what would you, as a working designer, what would you say the number one skill is? Is it being able to discern what actually is sustainable?
Yeah, I think the knowledge of understanding what kind of fabric is truly sustainable, that is first. And second of all, try to make the design and the style last as long as possible, as easy to wear as possible, so it's less disposable. I think that is, sum it up.
Yeah, start with the materials. What about you, Chris?
Testing, yes. I think the most important skills for today's designer is the digital skill. It's not, honestly, not sustainable materials, knowledge. Those can be supported by a team. But as I said, the product itself has to be in good quality. And so therefore, the design skills come first. So right now, digital design, with the software that available in the market, actually can create very realistic design, photorealistic. So with that image or design, then you can communicate better with the market so that you can understand whether the market really need that design or what they think. Then press a button, convert it to patterns, and then send it to factories. So everything can be done in a much more responsive way through the digital transformation right now. Then you can reduce waste. You can have more accurate predictions. Then it become more, environmentally friendly at the end. So I guess the digital skill is something that, at least in our Poly curriculum, have put very much emphasis in order to cope with the change in the fashion industry.
Great. And Greg, so we've got material, digital skills. What would you say is the top skill for emerging fashion professionals?
So actually from the consultancy, the marketing consultancy point of view, there's an overlap, I guess, with you for digital skills, but more in terms of understanding the consumers. So it's the same, I think, as what you mentioned, using platforms to understand what the market is going to react like. You have, the digital skills for understanding what tools are available to show the audience what designs you're thinking about, but you also have different ways to analyze what consumers think about in terms of not just your brand, but in terms of sustainability in general. What are the values they associate with being sustainable? Because you may be focusing on creating a message that's around something that you find interesting as a designer, but it may be too early for consumers to really resonate with that. So you have to really understand what is it that they think is sustainable and whether that's going to help you sell, I guess, more products to them as well.
Marianne?
All of the above. So going from Meiyan, raw material knowledge, technical knowledge of what a raw material is, I think is very important for designers because that's not really on your decision making. You source fabric, you receive fabric, but you're not necessarily the one extracting it, and you're not the one that's manipulating it and putting in the characteristics as such. So technical knowledge is really important. The digital knowledge takes all of that waste of sampling out of the equation, which is huge, huge efforts, especially from our point of view, which, reducing impact, it not only reduces all that sampling, it's speed to market, and it also is engaging with your suppliers. So that is a crucial factor for design. And in terms of going to market, you've got something that a market can visually see. You can reduce overproduction because you can create an instant reaction to something that looks real. There's sometimes you don't even know if it's been made or not. So a lot of what we've had is speed to market issues and designers churning things out and what's the new V-neck, what's the jacket style, but it's not what consumers want anymore. They want to engage with the product, they want loyalty, they want trust. And so the digitization helps all of those factors because it's traceability in your raw material, it's digitization to market. So I feel like we're in such an amazing space right now, but we can't do it all as a designer. We have to pick which one is where we're going to focus on. So.
Yeah, I want to pick up on what Meiyan said right at the beginning. There are so many ways to describe sustainability and what it actually is, and also how to measure it. There is no kind of universal standard for measuring sustainability. So how do you measure what skills are needed when you're thinking about sustainability? Chris, do you want to kick us off?
How to measure, right? It's a big question. So in our school, even sustainability, we have to break it down into 3 subjects. So one for designers, one for business, one for technology. So the measurements for each subject will be, as you can imagine, very different. But ultimately, we share the same ground, certain ground principles. So for students that we train, we need them have a shared common ground on understanding the principle of what is sustainability. And then, and how they interpret it as a designer, as a business, as a technology, or scientist, that will be very different. So how to measure it? I can only say more on the business perspective because I'm a fashion business colleagues. We do train students to have the compliance mindset at the beginning. So if they run a business, they understand, well, these are the compliance requirements that the market are expecting, the government are expecting. So they would develop the business model and the vision of the company at the beginning with that mindset. So of course, there are some third-party exam or certifications that they can learn or they can verify with the skills. So this is how I think, from the business perspective, on the measurement, is that what you say, the skill set, how to measure it. So if they know how to do it, they will get those qualifications. Okay, and yeah, that's my answer.
Meiyan, do you want to pick up on
Actually, I really agree. As a designer myself and also a consumer, when I go shop for brands, sometimes they tell me so, but I really not sure. Like they say get green, they say they're not. I go online, check for 2 hours. I still have no idea are they green or not. And then I found out that's one thing to consider at first is the business model of a brand. So that was my basic judgment. So if they are overproducing for every season, have so many pieces of garment and all the garments quality are mostly quite bad, then I will understand no matter how many organic cotton they are using, it still go to waste. That is just, it's a paradox, but it's the truth.
And from a brand's perspective, how do you approach the idea of sustainability from that side of how to market it?
So a little bit bridging over with how to measure it, I think from a consumer point of view, I think that's one of the considerations that a lot of brands have to basically stand out from other sustainable brands and then really get that trust from the consumers. So we heard before there was B Corp, there's other kind of symbols, certifications that consumers can start getting kind of understanding. If you're part of that certification, then probably the odds are you're going to be at least working towards a better sustainable kind of footprint. You have the butterfly mark for the luxury brands. You have other tools that groups are using, like Caring Group. They're using the environmental profit and loss, which is kind of a system to understand, to monetize basically the environmental impact and put it into their profit and loss every year. You have the Fashion Pact, which a lot of brands have taken part into. And so if you look at all these things and if a brand basically makes the efforts to join some of these certifications, already for them it's going to be a platform on which to communicate with consumers and show that they care about sustainability.
I mean, when designers are even thinking about beginning this design process when it comes to sustainability, what are the skills that they need to kind of be thinking about first and foremost? Maybe from the education side, Chris, do you want to start us off? When you're teaching about sustainability, what are the sort of things that you're putting into the curriculum, or what do you think is missing from curriculums in Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, we miss one very big, for fashion industry, we are missing one master degree for sustainable fashion because designers, very often they are frontline staff. Okay, unfortunately, you make the design, you make the products development. However, many decisions are like middle to senior management level. So that means the leaderships of leading the company, leading the brand towards the sustainable way is something we have to strengthen. So there are sustainability-related programs in other sector, in constructions, in generic business, in all kinds of, but not in the fashion, at least in Hong Kong. So that's something missing. Unfortunately, I proposed that program for like 4 or 5 years ago. It's still struggling to overcome all the hurdles to get it get it out. Because there are too many things happening. So digital transformation and AI, right? So there's too many important things happening. So you're competing with many hot topics. So that's the challenge right now. And so sustainability is important to us, but there will be a lot of hurdles to get it out. So leadership's part, middle management to senior management part, to me is the key. Is the key. So no matter you have how many designers who are well trained with all the sustainable design, if you miss the leaderships, then it's hard to get it out.
Yeah, Meiyan, maybe you want to pick up there. Tell us what it's actually like being a designer in the industry. You know, are you able to implement sort of sustainable ideas that you come up with, or do you face challenges when you're trying to communicate that to the brands you work with?
Yes, I face many challenges, and eventually that doesn't happen. That's my experience in general. Because I think from my experience as a designer, for brands, like if the brand, they do not have this direction, it's quite hard to convince them to start there. Because like somehow, to access to sustainable material manufacture, the options are relatively limited. If you have the full open market, you can go to the fabric market, pick any fabric you want. It's fast, cheap, and a lot. So if the brand do not have the mindset and the customer of the brand do not need it to start with, they wouldn't have the need to go through all the hustle to start over and face all the MOQ problem, price problem, and the delay problem. That's how I understand. So pretty much that's like, it's a paradox. Like I want to live my life and as a sustainable designer, but the most of brands I work with, they're not like that.
I mean, Greg, is it difficult for you to convince brands that between money and sustainability, are those versus, or can they work in partnership?
So, I mean, I'm going to steal a quote from the CEO of Kering, who said, sustainable business is smart business. And so I think if we take, the example of one of the leading luxury groups, that they've been able to implement all of these sustainability initiatives and have some of the most successful brands, I think that's a good case study to show that there's no need to convince too much brands that there is an opportunity there. I think the difficulty for us, because we focus on the marketing, so with the end point, we just communicate what they say, where we tend to consult is to do some research and understand whether what they want to talk about is going to resonate with consumers, number one, and whether it could be seen as greenwashing, like we heard before. If it's too weak and if it seems too gimmicky, then that could actually hurt a brand reputationally because it just seems skin deep. And consumers are a bit smarter than this. They understand more and more what it is to be sustainable. And so that's more the areas in which we tend to talk with the brands with.
I mean, Marianne, is there anything you want to add about, how do you sort of drive change when you're a design professional?
It's a good question, because I think my biggest concern is that designers don't get a seat at the top of the table. So the middle and high management will strategically make decisions on, are we going to change our materials? Are we going to change our supply chain? These are massive, significant changes that don't just happen. You can't just change the shape. So it does take time, but it has to come from the top in order to really make long-term changes. So when you're a designer, I think if you can understand that your place where you can inspire and make a difference, what I found on my day-to-day jobs, even though I was knitwear, which is knitted to shape and it's not creating as mammoth a scale as a t-shirt, I always find that brands would say, okay, we need to have the latest certification on cashmere and on wool and on cotton, like we need BCI, we need GOTS, we need recycled, but they were chasing their tail because they were trying to tick the box for marketing. They were desperately trying to know where they could drive their new products. But it was fundamentally about selling new products. It wasn't just the new color now, it was the new standard, the new certificate, the new tag. So I find it really frustrating because you sort of been lost in the noise, and I think what I'm trying to get design professionals, designers, or people just at that first creative part of the process is the more you can align yourself with things that make less impact. So the choices in your fabric, the decisions that you make to present it digitally. You can make significant changes even if you're not at that big table, and it will make a difference because there's no getting away from it now, and they have to listen. But if everyone does their part, then it's like, if you can make your area and your environment the best at what it can be, do good at what you do to the best at what you can, it will ripple into the next step. So I think where designers have maybe gotten a bit lost, I worry we became a lot more like a merchandiser, copy, paste, chase, cheaper. And it was a fact. I came out of it and did a master's in supply chain because I thought I can't keep on churning out swatches and samples for someone to just pick and put under their desk, and they did that to hundreds of suppliers. Suppliers are the ones that pay for the certificates. They are the ones that will get an email from a designer to go and get the latest standard, and they don't realize the impact it's making. So knowledge is key, education is key, and just really being aware of what your decisions can do for the good and for the bad, if that helps to answer a lot of noise in my head.
If I can add to this as well, in terms of your question earlier about sustainability and brands, the fact that a brand is sustainable doesn't mean they have to absolutely communicate about it. It doesn't have to be the selling points for them. It can just be sustainable, and by the way, it's also sexier than another brand that you're trying to compete with, for example. So I think that's also I agree, that's the balance that a lot of brands are trying to understand is, should they use sustainability as a selling point? And the reality is, it's not always the case.
But is it also thinking about sustainable or environmental practices from the beginning, or and involving designers in those processes? It seems from what you're saying, there's a bit of a gap between, the kind of big idea of wanting to be sustainable and then the sort of putting that into practice when it comes to involving designers and the other stakeholders down the line. Chris, you were nodding. I'm going to jump on you.
Because I heard many stories, how brands do have that, to put the efforts to drive designers to adopt more sustainable mindset and design. So, but they have to be evaluated at the end of the day, how sustainable the design were is part of the assessment. Otherwise, they would just go by the sales, right? So this is the challenge for, I guess I shared that last year in Fashion Summit, that one of the fast fashion brand, the directors shared with me that at the end of the day, all the brands compete for the sales and profit. So unless it sells better, they can't do much, okay? I mean, for the front-end designers, they are very reluctant to push forward. So therefore, so at the end of the day, it's the leadership issue. So I keep stressing that. So yeah. So
is it a case of involving designers early on in these decisions, or is it or how can what are the skills that professionals in the fashion industry need to bring in order to drive this like change? You know, it can't just
so
come
both
from the
sides.
top.
So both sides. So in the top-down approach is important. It's quick, but the bottom-up approach is fundamental, and I believe the influence will be long-term and less visible. Remember, I talk about the trust of the brand, right? So if the brand doesn't have the trust from customer, it's easy to break down the trust, because you said you do this, but you didn't do like 100%. So to avoid that, you should not say 100%. You should only claim 50%, and actually you did 100%. So how can you just do 50% and actually you do 100%? It requires like fundamentally change every designers. So every one of them do a little stuff, like what Marianne just mentioned. So everyone is doing a little bit. So no matter how you claim, there will be something there already fulfill what people expected. So this is the bottom up, to create a trust, because it's built in of all the designers' mind. So you don't have to train them, ask them, they will pick the right choice. Yeah.
So, I mean, what has the biggest influence to drive sustainable fashion decisions? Marianne, do you want to try this one?
Biggest influence? What do you mean by biggest influence?
Well, what do you think has the biggest influence? Is it consumers? So that will be what will drive brands to be sustainable, or is it? I don't know.
From my point of view, I think there's always some sustainable consumer. You just have to find them. Mm-hmm. So I guess just most importantly, I guess is the brand itself, and also the manufacturer is very important, like supply chain. Like, for example, if I'm a fabric supplier, if my like my company, I got many like organic cottons and all kind of like sustainable material, then I can offer to the brand in a relatively competitive price. Then it would be the same for brands. Like, oh, this is even better, and why not? Then I would just shop it. So I think the key point should be, I think designer actually is a very small role. Like, if that comes to our face, then we can deal with it. That's our job at the moment. But like, the company we work with, like in the market, more brands are more sustainable. That's very important, and also for the supply chain as well.
Greg, what about you when it comes from your end? What do you think is the biggest influence that can, drive being sustainable?
For me, that's a really hard question to answer, because I feel it's really a cycle. It's influencing each other, putting pressure on each other, brands and consumers. And then, so it's really hard which came before, the chicken or the egg, who put pressure first. You could say that maybe the biggest brands that start talking about sustainability then put pressure on other brands to become sustainable, and consumers then started expecting that, and more, like we heard it before, you have civil societies, you have consumers putting pressure on brands. But I still think we're not at the stage where consumers are putting so much pressure on brands to be sustainable at all. So clearly it's more driven by the goodwill, let's say, the goodwill in some respect of some brands, but also more industry pressure, because alongside the supply chain, kind of key players around the world kind of know each other, and will probably start changing their processes for one brand, and so they'll introduce whatever they're doing for one brand to another brand, and so this pressure, this cycle of pressure, is basically what's making it go forward, I guess.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it just makes me think that the competition will help to drive it. So the two sides, the competition to who can be the most sustainable. It's like, who's the cheapest, who's the most fashionable, and then policy. If we don't get policy involved top down, we can't move forward, because it will just be stuck in this narrative of sustainable, which people don't really know how to unpack, because everyone who is asked to describe it, or every company will certainly describe it in a different way. So I think one of the things we can do is to understand why we're doing it. Like, is it for the consumer? Because actually, are they going to pay more for your product? Not everyone else's, but yours. So if we look at it really kind of looking in the mirror, not who else is doing it or what we should be doing, what can we do so that at least that change can be felt. So if it's internally, there's nothing better than getting a product, and then once you've bought it, realizing how good it is. It's less impact. It's, it doesn't have 3 layers of plastic, and there's a QR code to tell you where it was made. Like, that is value now. That is free value to the consumer, but it is extended all the way back through, which is paid for all through your supply chain. But to me, that is the future of what's luxury, will be the transparency and the visibility, and the consumer wants trust. They want a reason to buy your product, and the designer needs to know that they've got a job, so they need to be able to deliver the right product so that everyone meets their mark, and then there's going to be the price. So there's not so much unification about what transparency means for products at the moment. It's still a little bit all over the place, trying to find its mark. So for design professionals, whether you choose design or whether you choose to be a quality control, or whether the more creative thinking there is along every process, the better off we'll be to solve problems, and each one will do it creatively.
And right at the beginning, Chris, you talked about digital skills. How do you use data to be more sustainable? Are the jobs within the fashion industry sort of evolving and changing?
Well, the job postings that we received from many brands, they very specifically request a digital design skill. So we are always short of this kind of graduates to fulfill the demand. So we are speeding up. Basically, we allow not just design students, fashion business students also can take those design subjects with the digital design. We are also offering extra short courses, not credit bearing, in order to equip them with more digital skills. So having the digital skills, how can it contribute back to the sustainability? I think it's quite obvious is the speed of the whole design process. You don't have to back and forth for the sampling and all this time wasted in the traditional way to make the design. So when you shorten the design process, you can be most responsive to the market. And you can be more responsive to the market. That means you have more precise predictions and more accurate design for the market needs. So this is something can contribute indirectly, okay? And of course, that will be good when you do the design. I know that some startup is doing that, making some carbon footprint calculators and or impact calculators, so that when these calculators and backed it with those digital design software, once they finish the design, they know the impact already, and they can evaluate the up and downs with different designs. Then that's the way to go. I guess eventually that will be a merge with these new types of technologies come together, speed up the whole process. And ideally, with the supply chain technologies, the factories are all connected with these software. They can immediately know, well, the demand of certain types of materials are coming up. They will get it prepared. So that would be great.
Yeah, looking at data, Greg, I know your company does research for brands. When we're thinking of consumers and looking at Hong Kong and mainland China, what is some of the research you've done about the mindsets of consumers? Do mindsets need to change in order to want to even buy secondhand clothes or participate in a circular fashion? Or is it, young people are more interested in, the older generation, their mindset isn't there yet? What can you tell us about the data and research you've been looking into?
So there's two dimensions that we've been doing. One is with éCLAIR, which is a consultancy, and one which is dejaWOOO, which is a pre-owned fashion platform. And so with éCLAIR, we've had the chance to work with groups like Kering or Bluebell. We help them basically understand the data that comes for them from the brands that they carry. Or from white papers that we carry out with them. Ourselves, what we do usually is look at the social media platforms in China, analyze what are the keywords, what are the key trends happening, and relate it, and try to correlate and try to paint a picture of what is the consumer mindset. One caveat though is, you have figures like Vogue Business that say, over 90% of Chinese consumers say they would prefer to buy a brand that is labeled or that they identify as sustainable. And then 50% of them say, I would pay a premium for that brand. But that's talk, that's intention. And then I'm not sure that we always see, the value of, these reports when it comes to actual reality. Like you mentioned before, will consumers actually pay, when they face with two products that, attract them equally, more and how much more for a product just because they identify it as sustainable. So that's kind of the nuance that we try to do with the brands when we do research, is understanding to what extent do you want to talk about sustainability, what resonates with Chinese consumers about sustainability. And the other thing from a éCLAIR perspective that I want to share as well is it's a bit broader than sustainability in a Chinese consumer mindset, in that there's this idea of healthy living and green living. And so it's not just about the impact on the environment, but also on the naturalness of the environment, I'm not sure if, of the material, sorry. And the kind of the health benefits for you, because they associate, through beauty products, but now more and more through garment products, the idea that if processes are natural, then they're going to be, having a healthier lifestyle. So there's a lot of values associated with sustainability that you don't expect to at first, that are not just related to doing good. There's an element of self-preservation as a consumer to say, I want good for myself. And that's another element of sustainability that I associate. The other side is dejaWOOO, which is a pre-owned fashion platform that we launched. And through that, one of the reasons we launched it, because China is far behind the rest of the world in adopting pre-owned fashion, second-hand fashion, mainly because there's consumer trust issues with authentic products, and idea is still that second-hand might be dirty or old or undesirable. And so one of the reasons we wanted to set up dejaWOOO is also for us to get information about who are the early adopters of second-hand in China. And what we found is above 90% of them are consumers that have lived abroad, or that have studied abroad, or that have kind of interest in global kind of fashion. And the reason being because they will have been exposed simply to second-hand fashion, mature second-hand platforms in the West. So this is an area that we want to understand more, because clearly, early adopters of second-hand fashion are also going to be, people who care more about sustainability, who are more open-minded, who will seek out more brands with sustainable values. And so that's one of the areas as well that we want to kind of bridge with our consultancy arm.
That is really interesting to see how, that these sorts of things are shifting and changing. But I think when you look at, Gen Z and the younger generation, and, some of those statistics that Natalie was talking earlier, less than 1% of material is recycled. Fast fashion is still, here to stay. It's still happening. It is happening amongst young people. I mean, how do you fight fast fashion and this throwaway culture? Meiyan, are you seeing young people, your friends, and are they, starting to think about, oh, maybe I'll keep this clothes for longer, or maybe I'll buy something that's better quality so it lasts longer? Or are they, just kind of going on Instagram and wanting to, get the latest trends and look, and then, chuck it away and start up again?
Definitely just wonderful trends, look pretty. I mean, they're like, we're not Gen Z, but like, people like my student, like my classmate before, they're still looking for like Zara clothes just to have a lot, cheap, not that cheap, but quite relatively cheap, and just keep changing it. That's definitely the main trend for now, for people who shop, no matter Gen Z or my generation. So my takeaway would be, we talked about before, like the clothes, the selling point cannot just be sustainable. It will be sustainable on top, that's like breathable, good material, it can last very long, very soft, in a relatively compatible price. That's how I understand. And then also maybe it's for brands who try to sell the sustainable brand as a new brand. I'm not sure it's going to work or not, but if I see that in a brand, then probably I'm going to shop it, is to do better in selling the lifestyle, or how to be a sustainable person. Like you were saying, like with a green lifestyle, like good to yourself, that kind of things, and try to market it into like, oh, that I have an attitude, like I am a cool girl or something like that, to market your clothes, market your brand, so people feel like, oh, if I have a sustainable mindset and I know how to pick my product, pick my clothes, pick my shoes, then I'm a person living with an attitude. And it's pretty much my way.
Yeah, so you have to sort of encompass things and fight it from all parts. And so, Chris, where do you come at this? How do you kind of fight fast fashion and this sort of culture when it comes to, teaching young design professionals?
Fast fashion brand actually offers a lot of opportunities for the graduates because of the more designs they need. They need more graduates to bring in their designs. So on the other hand, from the consumer side, I think we can consider that some group of target customers we can educate them much more easier than certain groups. For example, as you see from my research shared earlier, the higher education level, they are more concerned with sustainability. So these target group should be the target that we convince them that fast fashion is not the way to go, and I believe they are more. They're slightly more capable to buy more expensive and long-lasting clothes compared to the other part. So I guess we can do it strategically. We cannot do it like say, well, fast fashion is bad, and so fast fashion is bad in certain thing, but it's also can be good, right? You can convert them, and also they can actually can hire a lot of designers. So so to me it's good and bad. I won't say, well, it's something that I will fight and they should go bankrupt. I won't say that, but I think they can do a lot better, and we can strategically educate certain part of people in the consumer. We can limit the bad impact of the fast fashion.
Oh, I agree completely with both of you. I think from the consumer point of view, trying to sell it as something that is more desirable than fast fashion is number one thing to act on that impulse, and to basically outdo them on their own turf. One example that's not from the fashion world, but Tesla, for example, the CEO is not super popular right now, but this idea that he wanted to sell the company on the merits of the car, starting with sports car, rather than just saying it's an electric car. And so I think that's where, sustainable fashion also needs to compete, is not just on the merits of sustainability, but it's still fashion. Consumers still want to have fashionable items, and even better if it's sustainable. And then from the pre-owned fashion market point of view, so that's one way that we try to fight fast fashion. And the way we try to make it sexy for Chinese consumers is with upcycling. So trying to show that you can have really unique pieces, and it's almost like made to measure or one of a kind pieces for you. Something more desirable than the latest collection that you can buy, that a lot of other people will buy the same.
Yeah, like something that's one of a kind that you've just found because it's secondhand. I'm actually wearing a shirt which was my grandmother's, which was a Jaeger shirt, which I would never buy on my own, but I have a sort of sentimental attachment to it, and yes, it's one of a kind, and it's lasted more than 70 years and still going strong today. I mean, what do you...
I just wanted to add to all the points, but also to all the speakers before, that for me, I think the biggest takeaway is that it's not just a product anymore. It's a service, it's a memory, it's technology, it's a story. There's something beyond it, and I think from where design can really take its strength is that is very inspiring. You're not just a designer, and it's not just a product. And build on that, because there's so much in there. But it helps to deliver to the consumer, because I don't think the consumer is going to make the difference. I don't think they should be responsible to make the difference. I think everybody is. And the consumer will be drawn to which one they like most. And we're going to have so many more consumers. It's not going to stop here so we can change it. Like, we are doubling up. And so I think everybody's got to take that responsibility and take that product for what it does to them, whether it's your grandmother's or whether it's something you've saved up for or something you literally just saw and really wanted it. It's what you do with it then. And if you feel guilty, good. Give it to your friend. Give it to them for free. Give it to them for their birthday gift. But that's also a service. You know, it's paying it forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like mindset is a really important shift. That seems to be starting to happen, but obviously needs to be sped up and happen more.
Yeah, because we've got so many generations, and like people are living longer, and you know, so there's 5 generations all living together just now, which is busy.
Well, I want to open it up to the audience if people have questions for our panel. It's been such an interesting discussion. I think, is there someone we can pass a microphone to? You can pass your microphone if anyone has any questions. Don't be shy. Yeah. So you got 2 there. This lady in the front and a man in black.
The man in black, I like that, thank you. So we were talking about how to change perceptions, and I strongly don't believe consumers are going to change the perceptions of companies to make the big change when it comes to sustainability. I think having worked for big companies, the things that they really care about are regulation and taxation. So if we're truly to make change, what kind of taxation and regulation do the panel think is needed to really change the fashion industry? Because the consumer's not going to get us there. We need to make that change.
Right, so I guess in Hong Kong, what regulation would you want to see to sort of drive this change? Maybe Chris, do you want to start us off, and then Marianne?
Okay. I'm already trying to grab the mic. It's something that I really want to say. Compared to other industry like the electronic waste and construction waste, there will be a tax on that if you dumped it into the landfill. So, but the government right now only putting those recycle boxes around the cities to recollect it. So, kind of like say it's free is to throw away those used clothes. And the government enable the NGO to recollect it. Of course, it's good, but it's also sending out the message that it's still free to throw away. So, as I understand, if the most effective way we can follow what the carbon credits have been done in the whole world, if we say like we have a fashion credit, so every brand, you have certain limits of credits that you can use unsustainable materials, and at a certain date, you have to completely change over. So if you can't, you trade the credits to other brands. So I think that's the brands have to drive from profit. If it add into the basic cost, eventually they will find ways to improve the compositions of the materials or the energy they use. So then that will be much faster than the consumer educations. We talk about 20, 30 years since I was a primary school student. So it's not going to be accelerate a lot. So it is steadily improving, but if you like a quick fix in 5 years' time, government policies on major markets, regulations in China market, I think regulation on China market is already will play a really big part. I really hope any officials in the China central government can listen to it, and then that will radically change. So the economies of scale came up, and then everything shift.
What about you from a redress point of view when it comes to regulation? So many clothes end up in landfills in Hong Kong.
I think if you were to be taxed on your waste, I'd be good with that. be responsible. You know, they're doing it in Europe to have responsibility. And what I worry about is that that will all be pushed back to the suppliers, and there's less shared risk. So I do want to see that tax all the way up the supply chain, not just at the beginning. So where they're changing factories and cleaning their water, and that's coming from government, certainly that's what China did years ago, and every day we were getting factories closing. It needed to be done, but big players now have the monopoly. So, you know, where else does it come down? Like, who else can help to share the load? So I would say tax your waste. Whether it's, you know, if you don't recycle and you're putting out your bins, like Hong Kong mentioned that a couple of years ago, that you have to pay to put your bins out. Like, I was horrified because but we have no system for recycling it. I worry it still just goes into one bin because I can't see it. Can't see where, if I make the difference, who else is going to help me then take it to the next difference? Not asking the question.
And this lady in the third row.
I have a question for Professor Chris, and you mentioned about leadership. I'm wondering where the directors and managers absorb this kind of knowledge and arm themselves, because based on my experience, most of them want to join the MBA, DBA, this kind of education. They do not want to join not like the specific major like some fashion or foods. And I think most of them have the master degree, and I think PhD is much more for their opinions. So what about?
Oh, PhD is something for people who are not fear for permanent head damage. And unless you go for academia to do research, honestly, I don't suggest to do PhD. You can do DBA, which is you can develop the networks of business leaders. DBA is actually a better choice and more impactful. PhD is very lonely journey on things that could be very boring to most people. So unless you opt for that, you won't create much impact, actually. So unless you eventually you are the principal of a university or whatever, very senior management. Otherwise, the impact will be quite narrow. I guess DBA will be better. And MBA courses, somehow they will have one or two subjects or modules that about sustainability. And I believe every subject will talk about it a little bit. But compared to accounting, compared to finance, we don't have accreditation for a personal knowledge of how credible your knowledge of sustainability. There's no such thing, not a professional association that recognize your sustainability knowledge. From an educator perspective, I think we need to develop something like that. Otherwise, just something that are not in the mainstream. But however, it is something that's so important. So that's very ironic situation. So if we treat sustainability as important as accounting, then we should have at least auditing license for the sustainable operations. And that's something required for every company. So you need an accountant for every company. So maybe you need a sustainability auditor for every company. And we need a professional association to do that accreditation. So I guess that would be that should be the development direction instead of the higher level or degree of education.
Yeah, I think that's that sort of goes to your point at the back there of regulation and having sort of, bodies to actually make this not such a sort of fringe or a green or, idea for many companies. Does anyone have any more questions? I think we've got about a few more left. All right, one guy at the back.
Hi, everyone. We heard a lot about life cycle analysis today, the importance of data and the use of organic cotton and other good materials for the fashion. My question is, how do you ensure that you have the right data from throughout the supply chain? Because we all know that it's really hard to ensure that the cotton is actually organic, or when you also talk about implementing a tax of how much waste is generated, to collect all of this data, all of the different processes in between to make the garment, to make the final product. How do you get all of this data throughout the supply chain from all of the participants in the supply chain? Thank you.
That's a good business model right there. Because there's not many, it's hard, and there's not many people able to gather it just now. I think Keyring, we're probably one of the most forefront at being able to measure their environmental impact because they have the resources. You need to be a big player in order to put money and be able to measure it, because it takes a long time. It takes a lot of energy, time, because a lot of the data with new materials and stuff, you have to get rid of the greenwashing and really find out. And there's so many layers, and that's opening up a can of worms. So I think that's still work in progress. I think from my perspective, we're in it, which is good. And there is people that are putting traceability markers onto fiber, for example, like the Good Cotton company in Australia. They're putting markers, pigments that you're not visible to your garment. So you can trace it all the way through. So if you picked it up in a landfill and you scanned it with the right scanner, which you might not have on a landfill, but in an ideal situation, you scan it and you know exactly which farm it came from. Sheep Ink in the UK, they do sweaters and they have a little ID tag, which is a QR code that tells you which sheep it came from. It's not telling you the supply chain, but they're doing the best they can with what they've got. So that, again, that goes back to the storytelling and the value to the customer. And they're not going wide and doing it for, their whole collection of 350 pieces. They've chosen something and they're doing it really well. So I guess my answer to that is that it's building that, but only a few big players will be able to do it, and then they'll set the tone. And then again, it will be that chase to see who's next, how can I do it? Like maybe Uniqlo, Chris, you could talk to them, and they could do it. You could influence them as a big player, because they're what I'd love to see is the so-called fashion players, the fast fashion that do hundreds of thousands of pieces. They do need to up their game, but still produce those amount of pieces. So they need to do it responsibly. And one way to do that is to make sure their supply chain and the SDGs are covered. And so it might not be seen to the consumer, but within their supply chain, they are making those factors known. Like they need to know their supply chain, because consumers want to know. I can't really answer it with a yes or no.
But Chris, this is something you look into. What would you add to
Yes, and in my, whole research career, I always think about the question that you ask. And I have made some effort trying to align the third-party lab because they have the first-hand verified data from the factories, from all the products. So, but they're working independently, actually competing with each other. So that's the challenge. So individually, they keep all this data. Is it possible to align them to share on a platform they trust for the brands, for the factories? I try to do that, and seeking funding from Hong Kong government. But they said it's no use, so rejected. So, but I think the ideas can carry along with other supporters and budgets, and maybe I can make it out. So I guess the data is already there, okay? Because when they have to ship it to the brand, they have all these, what the brand requests them, they have fulfilled that. So how to do it without any privacy, security issues, while trustfully share among the platforms, blockchain is one thing, But the users are still very far from familiar with the technologies. So, and the bottleneck is not just blockchain. The bottleneck is quite costly to collect those data. So the third party will charge a very high price if you want the data be very precise and detailed. So they will charge. Not many factories can afford so many requirements for all the products SKUs. So that could be a challenge. So how can we, let's say that will become another business model? Can it be a Uber version of the third-party lab test? So that whenever you need something small, however small, but verified by someone else, and someone to verify for you. So there will be an ecosystem to verify. The auditor can be weighted whether their work is good and trustworthy. So maybe that's another business model to solve that problem, but it's a very difficult problem to solve. So not just one part. So maybe it can start from the trusted platforms, like the third party, they share the information, allowing the brands and the factories to use the platforms. Then we may have a chance to do that. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think, yes, there's a lot of challenges, obviously, for emerging fashion professionals, but it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities there as well to tackle these issues in creative and new ways using technology and other skills. So with that, and we'll wrap up the panel. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Meiyan, Chris, Greg, and Marianne for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.